all day.
6 News senior reporter Lincoln Holmes has the latest.
I don't think One Nation's winning any seats.
I just cannot see a reality where the Liberals are like 1 or 2 seats off forming a majority.
Australian news organisation 6 News,
the only news and current affairs channel which presents the perspectives of people their own age.
In my view, they're the best media outlet in our nation.
The Prime Minister gets up and says this, and I'm thinking, does this come from Channel 6 News?
Adam Bandt, welcome back to 6 News.
Thanks for having me.
Bob Carter, welcome to 6 News.
God bless all the listeners.
David Christopherly, thank you so much for joining us here on 6 News once again.
My pleasure, Austin. Thanks for having me back.
Senator Fatima Payman joins 6 News now.
Anthony Albanese, welcome to 6 News.
Good evening, it's just gone 6 p.m. in Western Australia, 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Welcome into the 6 News live debate, live and exclusive for Western Australian Senate candidates running in this week's federal election. We really appreciate all of them for joining us tonight. It is going to be a big debate packed with a lot of issues, and there's a lot of things to get through, especially as we approach the final week of campaigning. The rules for tonight, the same as they've always been, pretty simple. Each candidate gets an opening and closing statement, about 1 minute to 1 minute 30 to answer questions, not strictly timed, and candidates at the end will also have the opportunity, if they so choose, to ask one other candidate one question each. The candidates joining us tonight are Steve Klomp from the Australian Christians, Megan Krakouer from Australia's Voice, Jason Meotti from Legalise Cannabis, and Elana Mitchell from the Australian Democrats. I want to thank them all for joining us tonight. A special thanks to Elana Mitchell, who was very last minute in this debate after One Nation's Tyron Whitten, who was initially a candidate, was unable to participate. So this has been kind of organised in the last 24 hours. We want to thank her, and again, thank all candidates for joining us tonight. We will now begin with opening statements. Again, about 30 seconds to a minute if each candidate can keep to around that in alphabetical order by surname. Steve Klomp, you're up first.
Oh, I didn't expect that, but hello everyone, and thanks for allowing me on. My name, of course, is Steve Klomp, and I'm with the Australian Christians. I'm a federal Senate candidate. And for me, there are a number of issues that are very, very important that I want to defend or fight for. One of them, obviously, is the cost of living is a great problem for people in housing. But just as importantly, Aboriginal health and welfare. I've been involved in that area for more than 20 years. And of course, the cornerstone is pro-life issues for me. Defence, farms, Australian sovereignty, and of course, families.
Thank you very much. It does look like we've got a bit of a visual audio delay, but we heard you fine. So we'll stick with that. Next up, Megan Krakouer, your opening statement.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I really do appreciate it. Megan Krakouer, I come from a little place called Mount Barker. I'm the youngest of 13 children. I work as a director with the National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project. There's been about 10,000 people that have taken their lives right across the country in the last 3 years. In terms of First Nations people, it's gone from 1 in 23 down to 1 in 16, making it the leading cause of death for all First Nations people under the ages of 44. I decided to run with Australia's Voice because it was about the unheard, the marginalised, the voiceless, the silenced and the forgotten. And I wanted to run with Fatima Payman in particular because of her courage and her determination and basically her integrity. So in terms of some of the policies, we'll obviously discuss those throughout, but obviously it's things like suicidality, housing for our elders, cost of living, and there's so many other things that we'll talk it out throughout the show. But I'm really quite happy to be here, and I'm quite happy to be here with the other members as well. So thank you.
Yeah, we will definitely discuss plenty of things throughout the night. Jason Meotti, floor's yours.
Thank you. My name's Jason Meotti. I'm the lead Senate candidate for Legalise Cannabis Party. And I've just got a question, first off. Should anyone lose their job or licence taking medication that's prescribed by their doctor? Most people would argue no, they shouldn't. But unfortunately, that's the reality for many medicinal cannabis users at present. We have medicinal cannabis laws that allow people to use cannabis, but our workplace and safety laws have not caught up. What we would like to see is a move away from random drug tests that do not detect impairment and move towards impairment tests which are available now. And unlike some other minor parties, I will work with whichever government the Australian people elect on May 3. And what I sincerely hope that this election cycle, unlike the last two previous federal election cycles, which have elected 5 Labor, 5 Liberal and 2 Greens, I hope that it will be somebody from a party who is not controlled by the eastern states, that is based here or focused on Western Australia, so that Western Australia will get a fair deal federally, because I don't think that's happening at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Elana Mitchell, your opening statement.
Thank you. So my name's Elana Mitchell. I represent the Australian Democrats. For those who are possibly too young to recall us, we were first elected to the Senate in 1977. We held the balance of power for 30 years and worked with governments on both sides of the aisle to implement lasting change and significant reforms that bettered the country as a whole. We pioneered the concept of an independent crossbench that held governments to account. And while we lost our parliamentary representation in 2007, we have a new generation of Democrats coming through who are keen to return us to Parliament and pick up where we left off, which is serving the nation's interest and keeping the bastards honest.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll begin with the question that we have asked in all 4 Senate debates so far. Mr. Meotti, I'll direct this one to you first, but every candidate will get a chance. Australians do agree that the high cost of living is one of the top issues at this election. What do you believe has caused that, and what will you do to help fix it?
Well, look, I spent 20 years in the financial services industry, the last 12 of them running a successful financial planning business by myself, and my wife. And what I've discovered very early in that process was that once you get to a certain level of wealth, be that income or revenue, you stop paying tax effectively. And that is the problem. We have got a broken tax system in this country that does not tax the people who can afford it. This is not a moral argument. This is simply how the system works, is that the current system does not tax those people who can afford it. If that is fixed up through the introduction of a minimum company tax and a minimum income tax, that will basically solve the problems that we've got, and it will allow us to potentially bring in a universal basic income, which I am a big fan of. So yes, I get it. I myself and my wife are in financial hardship on our home loan. I'm on the disability support pension. I get it. I'm living it. I go to Spudshed on a Tuesday when I can get my pension at discount. So I know absolutely what it is like for everybody out there. I am one of you. Elect me and you will get change, because I need the change myself. So, always back self-interest when that horse is in the race. So I will act on this at the first opportunity to address that issue. Thank you.
Ms. Krakouer, same question to you in terms of cost of living. What do you really think's caused this, and how do you propose we get out of it?
In terms of cost of living, it's absolutely astronomical. And some of the things that we need to alleviate in relation to the housing, the cost of living with the supermarkets crisis that we have right now, with the duopoly with Coles and also Woolies. But we're not just talking about that, we need the tax breaks. So in terms of some of the tax breaks, under 48,000, there should be no tax whatsoever for people earning under that mark. This is one of the policies that we've put in place, and that will ensure that there is no tax for the people that fall under the age of fall under the mark of $48,000. The housing obviously is a massive issue, and I'm sure we'll cover that very shortly. But the cost of living right now is the groceries. It's being able to go into Woolies, into Coles, and be able to buy steak and so forth. It's very difficult to do. We have young people, older people trying to buy their own homes. It's almost impossible to do that right now. And we're looking at the rental market, people trying to get into the rental market. Again, it's really quite difficult in that situation. So there's a whole raft of issues in relation to the cost of living. And I think the pressures that many of us experience right across the nation, and particularly in Western Australia, is causing to mental health issues. And we're seeing people taking their lives as a result. And these are some of the things that we should not be subjecting people to in Western Australia, or indeed right across the country. But there's a whole raft of issues that very much contribute to the high living expenses of the people today.
You're right, we will get onto housing specifically in a second. Mr. Klomp, I'll get the same question to you again, really. How do you view the situation we're in currently with cost of living in WA and nationwide?
You can just call me Steve, by the way, Leo. But yes, we do have a cost of living crisis at the moment, and much of it is caused by government policy. So we have, of course, some fundamental changes in the way the industry, if we talk about groceries for a second, in the way the grocery or the supply chain for our groceries is actually put up. Years ago, it used to be the farmer or the supplier that had the power, but now very much it's the actual supermarkets. And as a result of that policy and some of the costs that they build in, or the charges they build into their suppliers, and the competition policy and other policies that the government has, we've created monsters that actually are actually costing us a lot of money. Now, on the other hand, if you're a shareholder of Coles or Woolworths, for example, you're probably very happy. But if you're the average person trying to fund their grocery bill, it's a very, very difficult thing. So we've had that problem. We've also compounded it by the cost of transport, because of course the cost of fuel is so great now, which is causing us a great problem. The other thing, of course, is that 1/3 of all the food that's sold in Australia is wasted, either by the supermarkets themselves or by the families, because of the way the system is run. And as a result of that, the rest of the food has to be very, very expensive to be able to offset the cost of that 1/3. So those are all things that have caused the problem. On top of that, of course, we have a housing difficulty. There's a great shortage of supply of land and infrastructure associated with that to therefore provide land for housing. And of course, the various governments, state and federal, charge a lot of money when you go to buy a house in terms of stamp duty and other costs. And that all contributes to causing a problem. On top of that, we don't look after families well enough in terms of money for them to supplement their income, to help them with raising their children. So all of those things are causing a cost of living crisis at the moment. We fix it by changing our policies on energy and transport, and fix out that by changing our policies on funding our families and how we approach the regulation of our supermarkets.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to call you Steve. I think we could. Everyone's happy to move to first names. Fine by me. Makes my job easier. Elana, then I'll get your thoughts again. Really, what's your view on the situation with cost of living?
It certainly feels like cost of living is a very recent thing, but I think it's actually the culmination of the last 20 or 30 years of government policy and structural inequalities in our economy and our society that are kind of coming home to roost. A friend of mine on the platform formerly known as Twitter, I think summed it up really, really well a few days ago when she said that the F around policies from short-term gains from previous governments is why we are drowning in find-out consequences right now. And so in order to solve it, we need to actually solve some of the big reform problems that we're currently experiencing, and that neither of the two major parties seems really interested in actually addressing.
All right, well, I want to touch on housing here. Megan, I'll start with you because you brought this up a few times, and it is really a key issue here. We know that not just for all Australians, obviously, but, young Australians in particular, housing has become a central issue when they're going into the ballot box this election. So Megan, what do you propose we do about the situation we find ourselves with these high prices, with these inabilities to buy and rent nationwide?
Okay, so there's a couple of things. Right now, we're looking at a poverty narrative right across the country. We've got over 3.3 million Australians, including over 700,000 children that are currently living in poverty. And that amounts to 40% of the renters before that will actually struggle and are struggling to pay rent over the next 3 years. But in terms of the housing, the major parties have allowed tax loopholes like the capital gains tax discounts and the negative gearing to fuel a housing market that benefits investors while leaving everyday Australians struggling to afford a home. That's a reality. With tax breaks covering the losses and reducing their tax bills, investors can afford to pay more for properties, pushing up the prices and forcing first home buyers to compete with people paying the system. And what we want to do at Australia's Voice is limit the negative gearing and reduce the capital gains tax discount from 50% to 25%, lowering it to 5% each year over the 5 years. But in terms of the housing, right now in Western Australia, we've got 20,000 people, and I'm talking about social housing right now, 20,000 people that are on the wait list for housing. 20,000. That equates to 50,000 people that are homeless or houseless. That does not include all the people that are street present homeless. And where I'm working, right across the road, we see so many people that are living in third world conditions in this 12th richest economy in the world. So how can we continue to allow this to happen? But other factors as well, and I know this is state, but this is something that I'd be pushing for as well, in terms of people living in social housing. It's really quite important that it's not 25%, which is of their total income, and those that are on Centrelink, but it needs to be reduced to 10%, 15% to allow people and families to have more money into their pockets. So these are some of the issues in relation to housing. It's very simple. The government have to release the land. They have to release the land, and by releasing the land, then we can build more homes. It is a fundamental human rights violation that every single person in this country does not have a home. So this is really quite problematic, particularly when we have a trillionaire economy in so many respects.
Elana, I'll let you touch on that as well. And look, I know when looking for party policies to kind of go over this election, I know that even at the last election, the Australian Democrats were putting out a lot of things around housing. So we know this isn't just an issue that's popped up in the past 6 months. Again, what do you really see about the situation we're in, and what are some specific policies that the Democrats would seek to enact around it?
Sure. So yeah, unfortunately, it is a 30-year-long problem that is coming to a crisis point now. And part of it is it's a vicious combination of the tax loopholes and lax tax policies that Megan raised, but also the fact that state governments chose to sell off social and public housing at the same time. And so on the one hand, we've eliminated the safety net that was social and public housing for low income and vulnerable people. And then we incentivized a regime of investing for wealth creation in housing and have created a permanent renter class, of which I'm one. So what the Democrats have been sort of campaigning on for the last two elections is obviously to fix the sort of perverse incentives around investing in housing, and that we've turned it into a speculative wealth creation asset as opposed to a human right. So lower the capital gains tax discount by 25%, I should say. Remove negative gearing, but also, massively increase investment in housing by government. So, invest in safe and permanent and supported housing for people who have either been homeless or at risk of being homeless. Fund transition housing, for people in crisis situations and family violence, and massively invest in social housing, for the people who are at the greatest risk of long-term homelessness. Because what we've done by removing social housing is push the vulnerable and low-income people into the rental market, which has then sort of removed lower, more affordable housing from sort of the next demographic up, and it has, contributed to an ongoing increase in rents and shortage of housing. So unfortunately, this is not something that can be solved quickly. There is no single issue that will be able to solve this in the short term. And as a nation, we have to accept the fact that we have to do something quite radical and quite comprehensive to solve this as a problem. Otherwise, we will have generations of people locked out of housing.
Steve, I want to get your thoughts on this, and also was particularly touched on there about family violence. We know that families are always trying to find homes. That's something that the Christians have a lot of policies around families. So really, where do you see the housing crisis? And again, what specific policies do the Christians have?
Okay, so it's important we understand, as Elana said, that this is not a quick fix. So if I get elected into the Senate and I influence others to go with me, and we put in place, solutions, it's 30 years before the housing crisis is over. There are things we can do, obviously, and we need to do them straight away, but we have to understand it is a long-term thing. Even if we released all the land, and by the way, great swaths of land all around capital cities are owned by investors, and they just sit on the land. It's not a question of government actually releasing land. They can release some, obviously, but they just sit on the land until they can make a lot of money by selling it. And you can't stop them from doing that because we have a free country and a free business system. So we've got to understand that it's a very long-term thing. We also have to understand that even if we were to release great lots of land, we still have to have the infrastructure to get to. We've got to have roads and freeways and all those sort of things, which cost a lot of money to build. So it's not going to be a very quick fix. That's the first thing. There are things that you can do, though. So, for example, rather than allowing people to sit on great swaths of land, we say, well, we think that would make 1,000 housing blocks, so we're going to charge you, $10,000 per block as if it was created. And all of a sudden, the tax would be so great that offset the land and get rid of the land. So there are things like taxing those things that you can do. You can also ask yourself, all right, well, what about what other factors are contributing to this thing? Now, there is no coincidence that the amount of housing we require, a couple of 100,000, is about equal to the amount of immigration we're having at the moment. Now, don't misunderstand, I'm all for immigration. It made this country. A third of the people in Australia weren't born here. But we can't afford, we don't have the infrastructure to be able to handle the amount of migrants we're having at the moment. So that's a difficulty for us. We've got to curb that. We've also got to change some policies. I mean, I actually work with the Department of Communities over here, and I know how tough the social housing is. But we also have to remember that we've caused it ourselves. I mean, people in social housing now expect to be in social housing from cradle to grave. It was never intended to that. It was supposed to be a stopgap measure while you got yourself on your own feet. And now we have the situation where we have to supply housing for people from cradle to grave. In some instances, it's required, but a lot of the time, it shouldn't be. Now, at the moment, in some areas of Australia, the waiting list to get public housing is 8 years long. So, I mean, by the time 8 years is gone, if you don't have a house by now, where are you living all this time? It is a crisis, but we have to understand the solution isn't just to start producing more social housing, which we can't afford to do anyway. It's a multifaceted thing. Now, having said that, there are some things that we have to do straight away. You cannot have a situation where a person is subject to domestic violence and they stay in the home because they have nowhere else to go. So we have to have special and different policies for people who find themselves in that situation.
Elana, I saw you kind of raise your eyebrow at some of those comments about social housing, so I'll let you jump in with some thoughts then.
Is this a question, or did you get another question later?
Just go ahead, Elana.
Thank you. So it's not so much a question as it is a comment. I think it's possibly impolitic to frame it as an expectation from people that they expect to be housed from cradle to grave. I mean, a huge part of why they are stuck in social housing is simply the lack of opportunity and the lack of ability to, as you said, lift themselves out of poverty. And a huge part of that comes down to, the fact that, as a country, we choose to keep people in crippling levels of poverty through our very, very targeted and very, very frugal social security system. So it is not just housing, it's a number of factors that are coming together that are causing this perfect storm of both a housing shortage in terms of social housing, but also we put barriers in place to people to prevent them from, clawing their way back up into being productive members of society. I think it's just a little bit unfair to kind of imply it's their fault and that they have an expectation that they will be housed. I mean, we're a very rich nation and we should be a very compassionate nation. And, we should, from a social justice perspective, we should be looking after people, and that includes housing them, giving them, the supports they need to be their best selves and be productive members of society.
Well, and I was just going to say, and I've worked with about 30,000 people with a colleague of mine over the last 5 years. That's the most marginalised, the vulnerable, the voiceless and the silenced. And housing is a real challenge. And if we start compounding the issues with the 132 castle estates right across the country, and of that the 17 youth detention centres, there are a lot of people that are entrenched in the poverty. Now, it's not the intention for people to stay in public houses, but we must also factor in the mental health crisis that we currently have, because the mental health crisis, that also impacts on a person. So right now across this country, there is no intense psychosocial support, there is no assertive outreach, and there's no 24/7. So people lead and are living lives with this disordered thinking. They can't go to all these different counsellors and so forth because the availability of those counsellors aren't available. So we also need to recognise that some of the most marginalised and vulnerable just don't have any means whatsoever. And that's making the assumption, it's making the assumption that every single person has the ability to get on the housing wait list, because many people do not have Centrelink, many people do not have identification, and you are therefore not one of those people who are the 20,000 in Western Australia that are homeless or houseless because of this. It's just a grave assumption that that is, and these are the different types of brothers and sisters that I work with, both black, white and brown.
Steve, Jason, I know you've been waiting patiently. I'll get you in just a second. But Steve, you just did hear from two candidates, sort of directly responding to you. So I will just give you the opportunity to respond quickly.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I actually agree with what Elana is saying. We do have a social justice responsibility to help people. And I certainly agree with what Megan is saying as well, because there are some people, let's be honest now, I've worked in Aboriginal health for about 12 or 15 years or something, and the number one issue for Aboriginal people is mental health issues. And a lot of that stems from, lack of housing. I mean, there's absolutely no question. I'm not suggesting for a second that we shouldn't be a compassionate country. Of course we should be. We should look after people as best we can. Obviously we want them to help themselves, but we should look after people, and those people who cannot help themselves should be helped by us. We have a Christian responsibility to do that. But that's only some of the argument. There are a lot of people who don't fall into that category, and when they turn 18, they live in public housing, and when they turn 18, they apply for public housing, and they live in it for the rest of their lives. And it's been like that since the 1940s, when the public housing started to expand based on the British model. After the veterans came home from World War II. So we have this expectation, unfortunately, but now that's quite divorced from the idea of needing to help people who need help. Obviously, we need to provide housing and health and education and whatever to other people, to people who need the help. And we have very strong policies on family. Do we look after family, because they can be quite vulnerable? That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is our housing crisis cannot be fixed quickly. It's going to cost a heck of a lot of money, because even if we had the land, even if we could afford the houses, we've got to have the infrastructure going to it. We've also got to look at other things. And one of those is taxing people who have the land, who are sitting on it, putting money into infrastructure so that we can actually provide the housing, and saying to people, well, actually social housing for people who aren't in need is not something that is cradle to grave. You've got to think about coming off that housing when you're on your feet. And Elana was absolutely right. We put barriers in their way to stop them from jumping up. We've got to fix that as well.
All right, Jason, actually, Megan, I will give you a very quick response there, but yeah.
Okay. So just in terms of people, and we are trapped in this cycle right now. So even if you're living in housing, social housing, you can only earn about $76,000. And if you earn more than $76,000, you have to go into the private rental market. Now, we know that there's not enough houses in the private rental market. So that, again, is putting pressure on people. So in terms of government traps, what they need to do is raise the threshold from around $76,000, push it up to $100,000 at least, so people can start earning while they're in this public housing, so they're not kicked to the streets, because that's what happens. And I've seen too many of it, where people have said, if I earn over a certain amount, I'm going to get kicked out of my house. If I try and get into a private home, well, I'm making less anyway, so I'm going to end up much worse. So this is a trap that the government have put us into. And, there's a lot of brothers and sisters that want to work. They want to be able to move out of their public housing and so forth. But the cost of living in terms of renting something, in terms of buying something, the opportunity is simply not there.
Absolutely. It's one of the barriers we put in people's way. I agree with you. Got to fix it.
Okay. I will let Jason get in. He's been waiting very patiently. I appreciate it. Jason, the Legalised Cannabis Party, is obviously focused on legalising cannabis. I'm not sure if anyone could guess that. But on housing specifically, where do you stand, both as maybe a party, but also yourself individually, on the current crisis that we're seeing?
Well, look, there's actually something I want to address that's already been spoken about by the last couple of speakers, and that is this poverty trap. Now, I'm somebody who ran a successful financial planning business with my wife. We raised 4 children. We were in 6 figures. We didn't live a luxurious life. We didn't have overseas holidays, but we did have an annual trip up to Sharp Bay. We take the kids camping. We had a comfortable life, but we weren't wealthy by any means. When I was forced to stop work because of mental health and physical reasons, and I had to fight to get on the disability support pension, I might add. I got paid out a total and permanent disability claim in 23 days. Now, I'm from the industry, okay, but 23 days is ridiculous. So they paid that because it was obvious that I was like 2 grounds total permanent disabled. I got paid out. I then applied for the disability support pension. I was rejected out of hand. I spent 12 months fighting. And when it was finally given to me, they'd said they should have given it to me to start with, right? That's the process. But what happened with, and this is when I come back to the poverty trap, when interest rates went up and our mortgage jumped $700 a fortnight in a matter of 12 months. Now, because of the way the Centrelink and taxation interact, which I hadn't really grasped until I was in the middle of it, my wife and I, we were effectively taxed at 82.5 cents in the dollar. And I'll explain how that was. Because my wife ended up having to work more, okay? Because I couldn't work, so she took more hours. I would lose 50 cents of my benefit for every dollar that she earned over a level, right? So there's 50 cents gone. We were then assessed on the gross. So my wife was losing 32.5 cents in tax. It's now 30 cents. But that meant we were effectively getting 17.5 cents out of every dollar that my wife was earning. Now, in order for us to make up that $700, we needed $3,500 a fortnight. Now, that's another job. Now, this is the problem that the system is that how, you know, if we had a tax system that said if you earn more than $20,000 a week, so you're on $1 million a year, we then said, look, everybody earning more than $20,000 a week are going to pay 80 cents tax on that money. There would be an outrage as being unfair. But when you're at the bottom of the ladder, when you're in poverty, that's what the reality of the situation is, which is why I'm a fan of bringing in a universal basic income to keep everybody out of poverty for a start. Now, if we move to housing, look, I've become a bit of a fan in the last few months with hemp. Right, I sort of knew a bit about hemp before I took on this role. I was more involved in the cannabis and the law reform side of it. But I actually disagree with most of the callers. I believe we can act, and we can act almost straight away if we release the shackles on hemp. Now, I've got a container here. This is called herd. This is a woody substance that comes from the centre of the hemp plant. Now, hemp grows in 14 weeks. If you grow 3 acres of hemp, you can actually build a house with the hemp that comes from that. So if we grew 30,000 hectares of hemp, we could have 10,000 hemp houses built every 14 weeks. Okay, it might take a little bit longer. Obviously, you've got processing and a few other bits and pieces, but you get my drift. We can very, very quickly pump out housing if we release the shackles on hemp. Now, at the moment, under federal law, this is a narcotic. You could scoop out wood chips from your garden and that will get you more stone than this stuff. There is absolutely no THC in this. But because we've got these ridiculous laws that effectively criminalise hemp as well as cannabis, we don't have the access to this plant. So from a party position, we want to see hemp released so that these industries can take off. And it can particularly help our agricultural regions in Western Australia who are seeing a downturn, forestry downturn, farming downturn. You know, we can use hemp to reclaim damaged land, to use as a rotation crop to improve the soil. And every time you plant hemp, you take more carbon out of the air and sequester it than before you started. So even if all of the hemp gets used and converted back into CO2, you're in front. So I would argue that there are a lot of things that can be done pretty well straight away. The land is available. There is land available if they were prepared to do multi-dwellings. You know, we've probably got to move away, at least initially. People are going to have to probably get used to living in like townhouses or apartments until we can bring and scale up the building industry. Now, the other things I think we need to act on, and this is a national thing, which is why I'm very passionate about federation reform. At the moment, we do not have a prefabricated building industry in this country. And the primary reason for that is that every state has got different rules and regulations around what is an appropriate material, how they're built, their sizes and everything. So we can't have an intrastate supply chain system where, say, maybe one side's producing the frame, another one is producing the product, and it all comes together. So if we can get genuine national consistent building laws, we should be pumping out prefabricated building like they do for mining sites. Like, you know, it's not like this isn't already done. You know, they build mining camps very quickly here, particularly in Western Australia. The scale is just a matter of scale. So I believe we can act on this quickly. It's just a matter of will and a matter of changing our thinking outside of the norm.
All right, there was a lot there, but we appreciate you getting on to a lot of that. And I do want to actually touch on legalising cannabis. It is your key proposal. You're not the only party, of course, to support that kind of position. I know the Libertarians do, but of course, in terms of parties with actual federal representation right now, the Greens have been calling for it for some time and have been during this campaign. Why then, Jason, I'll get to other candidates shortly, but Jason, why then should voters go for legalised cannabis if they want legalised cannabis?
Well, can I just point out that when it comes to the Greens, they've had the potential to hold the balance of power in the last 6 parliaments. So we're going back to 2007. So when the Democrats lost the balance of power, that actually transferred to the Greens. So my question is, why has it taken them 6 election cycles to effectively come up with the realisation that they need to legalise cannabis? I don't think they're serious about it. Certainly the bill that they put up last year was not a serious proposition. It didn't even get the support of some of the more moderate independents like David Pocock. So I think that was more of a messing exercise than it was actually to get cannabis decriminalised. The reason why I'm passionate about cannabis decriminalisation is less about cannabis and more about hemp. I come back to it again. Hemp at the moment has been the unfortunate victim in the 100-year-old failed war on drugs. And let me just point out something too when it comes to cannabis and the war on drugs. Now, I've spoken to people who support the war on drugs, right? And I asked them, look, clearly you're not going to stop the supply. You've had 100 years to do that. That's clearly not going to happen. I say, well, what would you take as a win? How would you assess a win with the drug war? And it comes down to that they would like to see, as we would, less people using illicit drugs. Now, in the situation with cannabis, and it happened here in WA, now I spearheaded a campaign over a decade in the late 90s, early 2000s to decriminalise cannabis here in Western Australia. And that came to fruition in 2005 with the Cannabis Control Bill that was passed by the State Parliament. Now, in the 5 years that program ran, those laws were in place, cannabis usage rates amongst teenagers came down every single year for 5 years. And then in 2010, when WA got the accidental premier in Colin Barnett, he overturned those laws and drug usage rates, cannabis usage rates went straight back to where they were before. So in fact, if you want to have success in having less people take cannabis, law reform, responsible law reform is the way forward. Now that's been proven in in Canberra, yes, but also Canada, where it's been legal since 2018. Now I ask, why do we want to continue to support drug dealers and corrupt officials who are the only ones who are benefiting out of the current legalised, what's the word I'm looking for? The criminalisation of cannabis. They're the only ones who are winning out of this war. I think that money should be in our hospitals and our schools, should be taxed, should be regulated, and we will have far less problems if that is the case.
All right, Steve, what's the Australian Christians' position on cannabis and cannabis legalisation?
So the Australian Christians are against the idea of it, but I'm speaking more personally than party-based policy. I'm certainly against it. I have never taken any illicit drug at all myself, nor cannabis, but I have a lot of experience of people who had. Now, in some ways, I am sympathetic towards Jason. Of course, if we think about cannabis, the banning of cannabis dates back to the paper wars, when they were trying to decide whether to make paper out of wood or hemp, and in many ways we would have been better off if we'd made it out of hemp. But anyway, they banned all cannabis rather than just particular types. So that's an aside. It may well be that hemp or cannabis is a good crop for certain things and should be used for certain things, as long as that cannabis can't also be used for recreational drug use. So I think I'm a bit sympathetic in that regard, but in every other way, in terms of usage by people for, as a recreational drug, I'm certainly against it. I follow the Australian Medical Association's advice. Now, admittedly, some of their advice is based on the idea that it is hard to assess what the long-term safety implications of using cannabis are. I accept that, but for me, that's a reason not to do it. I think the other thing is that it's also true that sometimes cannabis is poorly prescribed or overprescribed. But and I know that Jason's party do want to rank cannabis use alongside alcohol and tobacco and tax it in the same way and have it used in the same way. I also have experience of excessive alcohol use, and that causes incredible damage to our society and incredible damage to families. So I certainly wouldn't want to be adding another thing that people can use for, for recreational use of things like cannabis. So based on and the other thing is I have a lot of experience of people who've used cannabis, and I tell you, it changes the way they do things. And in fact, when I was in safety situations, I didn't want to be with them because I couldn't rely on what they were going to do. So because of that personal experience and the advice of the Australian Medical Association, which still stands, the policy should be no cannabis, no legalise it. Now, having said that, if we want to use types of cannabis for industrial use, yes, but that's a different story. And the production of paper using hemp, I think, would be an obvious example.
I'll let Megan jump in here. I'm curious, where does Australia's voice stand on the issue of cannabis?
Well, we're actually a new party, so we're 4 months strong. So just speaking from personal experiences and so forth, what we find is that many people who use cannabis and cannabis products, and basically that's as a treatment for chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, mental health conditions, but there has been research that identified both benefits and risks to using cannabis as a medicinal treatment. I myself am not for legalising it because I've seen the impacts in the community. I've seen the impacts where people are actually using, and it actually impacts on their driving, impacts on a whole range of things, impacts on their relationships. Domestic violence as a result ensues. So I guess in terms of my stance in relation to it, whilst I respect that there's some benefits in relation to it, personally, I'm not a person for legalising it.
And Elana, your party's position?
Sure. So at the moment, we don't have an official policy. We're still researching and investigating. While we understand the argument for decriminalisation, we have medical scientists and medical researchers in the party who are concerned, as Steve and Megan raised, about the long-term effects of cannabis use, both medicinally and recreationally. So we're still trying to determine, being an outcomes-based, outcomes-focused party, we're still trying to determine the best way to actually implement either decriminalisation or, medicinal cannabis, so that, alcohol is not just the service and sort of distribution of alcohol that's heavily regulated in this country, the composition of alcohol. So you can't sell alcohol that's more than, a certain amount proof in Australia because of the potential health impacts and safe use of it. And so our focus is trying to come up with a legislative outcome that would enable people to use cannabis either recreationally or medicinally for pain relief in a way that ensures that they can use it safely in the long term. And we still haven't come to a position on that yet because the evidence just isn't there. There is evidence that medicinal cannabis is incredibly useful for pain management, but some of the claims that have been made around the effectiveness of medicinal cannabis don't seem to be backed up by evidence. And so it's kind of a wait and see issue for us. We're still researching, still investigating.
Leo, can I
Jason, I'll give you a response if you can keep it short-ish, I'll give you a response.
Well, short for me. Look, can I just say that I pretty much disagree with all of your callers there. The fact is that we've had, up until 100 years ago, right, for tens of thousands of years, humans used cannabis like we did other things. And I'll bring you to, Steve, Genesis 1, verse 29, right, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right? This is a plant that was put on this earth, right, by God or by whoever, right? But it has been put here for us to use. And like I said, up until 100 years ago, when it was demonised, now Steve talked about the paper wars, the actual thing that really got it over the line, that got legalisation happening or criminalisation, was the fact that there was a Mr. DuPont who just invented a plastic called Bakelite. but it was very much subservient to the hemp equivalent. Now, he didn't want the competition, and it was around that time when alcohol prohibition was ending, and the organised crime network that alcohol prohibition had created wasn't going to go anywhere. And coincidentally, all the other drugs that up until that point in time had been used pharmaceutically all of a sudden became criminalised. So look, I'm not putting the silver foil hat on, but there really was a conspiracy 100 years ago to criminalise cannabis. And up until, like I said, that point, 60% of all analgesic prescriptions in America, up until 1900 when they rediscovered aspirin, were cannabis. The doctor would literally send you home with a joint and say, take this. So a lot of people sitting here, their great-grandparents were using cannabis for period pain and things like that. So it's not like all of a sudden it's a problem. Now, the research is, as far as I'm concerned, you can go and find research that will come up with whatever you like. But the fact is that it was fine for 10,000, 50,000 years before 100 years ago. It is not a dangerous drug. It is actually a gateway away from other drugs now. They're using it to get people off ice, to get off alcohol. And if I come back to alcohol too, we need to tighten up our regulations around alcohol. We've got the ridiculous situation at the moment where a $10 4-litre cask of wine has got the same amount of alcohol in it as 2 bottles of spirits. But that is the reality. So we need to change the taxation system on alcohol to make sure that those harmful products, the bulk wine and the RTDs, are taxed as they should be, and to decrease the damage in our community. But I disagree. It can be done, and up until 100 years ago, it was fine.
Leo, you've got to let me answer that one. We can't.
I will quickly, but yes, I'll let you get in.
I mean, you can't really be quoting Genesis and saying, well, every plant is there for our use, therefore you can consume it. I mean, there actually are poisonous plants around, Jason, that we don't actually advise you to eat. So the fact that Genesis says that doesn't mean that God says, hey, let's use cannabis. It really doesn't follow. It's a really lousy argument, Jason.
I disagree. I disagree completely.
I'll send you some poisonous stuff and you have a go and see how it works out for you.
I understand how poisons work. I'm an industrial chemist. What I'm saying is cannabis is not dangerous. There's not a single death certificate on this planet that has got cannabis as the cause of death. If it can't kill you, how dangerous is it? I'll put that to you.
Well, it does contribute to the vehicle accident rate, so maybe that's not quite true.
Alcohol?
Jason, do you have, scientific peer-reviewed research that tells us that cannabis isn't a dangerous drug or can't kill you or can't contribute?
Well, it hasn't killed anyone. There is literally no death certificate in history that has got cannabis as the cause of death. So I don't know. You go find me one and we'll have the conversation. But to my knowledge, it's never been issued because guess what? Cannabis cannot kill you. It's not a narcotic. It doesn't actually influence the breathing system, the natural breathing system of the body. You smoke too much cannabis, you fall asleep. That's what happens.
All right, there is a lot of issues to get to.
Basically, it really depends. Depends on the person that's actually using. Because I know where I was saying, where I know about people where they've used it, it's actually contributed alongside of their other challenges to domestic violence where they've been perpetrators of that. I know sometimes people
just cannabis, not alcohol or ice, just cannabis. I would question that alcohol and ice will be in there somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah. No, not necessarily. And I can tell you right now, there's been times when people have actually used just cannabis on its own in isolation, and it's impacted on their driving. So therefore, they become a road risk. And we understand about the road fatalities right across this nation where it's at an all-time high, but it does impact on a person when they do drive. I'm not saying
they shouldn't be driving impaired. They shouldn't be driving impaired. And if you've got a 0.04% alcohol content in your blood, you can drive, but you're 200% to 300% more likely to have an accident. So we do allow people to drive impaired at the moment. But of course, it's alcohol, so it's okay. I agree with you, Megan. Don't worry. I don't want to see people driving impaired, be it for anything, alcohol, tiredness, drug use, whatever. They're a danger on the road. But at the moment, our drug testing regimes only test for presence, and because the metabolites from cannabis last in your system for 6 weeks to 3 months, you can be pinged 3 weeks after you've had a smoke, and you can lose your license and your job. That's the question I'm saying at the moment. It's the issue. I don't disagree with you, and I know domestic violence is a huge issue, and it's something that's very close to my heart that I want to see addressed. But I think the issue there is more alcohol related, and it comes back to trauma. Why are people taking drugs in the first place? Most of them have an underlying trauma that hasn't been treated because we've got a mental health system that is just not coping at the moment. So if we can get those services to people, drug use is generally not the cause of the problem, it's a symptom of a bigger problem. And that's where we want to get to and start addressing these underlying causes, which keep people in poverty, which keep them out of work and keep them out of proper housing. We need to address all of these things. But you know better than anyone, Megan, that the Aboriginal community, the First Nations people, are the ones that have been hit hardest by cannabis criminalisation. They're the ones that get busted with a tiny amount, that they end up with multiple. You know, I met a lady at the 420 event who works for Aboriginal Legal Service. She said she's got people with criminal records that thick just with cannabis, minor cannabis offence. It's proportionally damaging to the lower income and lower socioeconomic people, and that's been proven globally with drug laws.
Okay, I'm very conscious of time, Megan. I'll let you get in a quick response. I'll get to you then, Elana, and then we do have to move on to another topic. Megan, quick response if you can.
Yeah, so Jason, I actually agree with you in certain respects because it does impact gravely where there are mental health issues. What I'm saying in terms of some of the men, some of the women, I've seen in situations, I've heard situations where it's just been the drugs alone, the cannabis, where the partner says to the other, you need to get me something. You need to get me something straight away. If you don't, then one thing leads to the next. And it's really horrible in terms of that trauma. But in terms of that trauma which you mentioned, we know that trauma, if it's not validated, it can't be addressed. And unaddressed trauma kills. So I agree with you on that particular point in that sense. So that's what I just wanted to add.
Okay, Alana, I'll let you get in the quick response, and then we will have to move on from this.
There is evidence that cannabis use does contribute to the presentation of schizophrenia in people who are susceptible to it, and also psychosis. So it's not. I appreciate that you feel that this is a very safe and easily managed drug, but I do think that there is more research and better regulation that needs to be considered before we can look at legalization.
We're not jumping straight there. That's why we do decriminalisation first and then see how that goes. And then once we get there, then we move on to the next phase. So it's not just
Jason. We will have to, I appreciate, it is your big thing, but we will have to move on there. By the way, just a note for the viewers at home, if you're seeing a few weird visual and graphic glitches, I don't know, the computer's gone bung somewhere else, but we're still on air, so that's all good, which is what matters here. I will just completely changing topic, and Steve, I'll direct this one to you. The Australian Christians, I guess, are a party, some might not know. For our national viewers, you are obviously predominantly in WA. You did just get a seat elected at the recent state election, which will be officially sworn in next month. But look, it's an explicitly Christian party. A lot of Western Australians, a lot of Australians aren't Christian and maybe not necessarily religious at all. Would you be able to still effectively represent them in Parliament?
That's a really good question. I think you first of all got to ask yourself how many people are Christian in Australia, and there's actually a lot more than we think, somewhere around the 60% of people. So I think that's a fairly important thing to consider. The other thing we have to consider is that our policies really apply to everyone. I mean, we want to have Christian-based policies in Parliament, obviously, but they apply to everyone. I mean, you can't really argue that, we're not going to fix the economy because we're more worried about something else. I mean, obviously we have policies on everything, and one of those policies, of course, is how terrible our economy is. I mean, we have a $1 trillion debt, and we're a country of 30 million people. It's completely unsustainable. And we spend our money on stupid things, and successive governments have been doing that for decades. So it causes the trouble. And that, of course, is a debt that our children and our grandchildren have to pay off. So, I mean, we are a Christian-based organisation, obviously, but we have common sense policies on things. Other ones are support for farmers, who are the backbone of our country for many years, and support for our mining people as well, and in fact in rural areas entirely. But also defence. We need to spend much more money on defence than we already do. We need to look after families. I mean, the only way we can support our people now, our superannuation now is we have more people who are going to actually, enter the workforce. So we have to support families in what they're doing in raising their children. So I think it's fair to say that if we look at the policies of our of our party, our policies are generally for all Australians, regardless of whether they are Christian or not. And, I think I'll stand by that. And I think it's fairly easy to see where we are going wrong. We're just compounding debt all the time. We're not looking after families. We're fiscally irresponsible. It's not just how much debt, but what we spend it on. We don't look after our Aboriginal people. It's terrible, some of the conditions that the people live in, and it's unacceptable and it's not necessary. So there are pro-life issues in that, but obviously we want to extend rights to children who are unborn. We want to extend rights to children in the womb. They are Australians from the point of conception. We want to have strong farms and strong defence. So I think it's fair to say that our policies are, desirable, acceptable, wanted by all Australians. And I think most Australians realise how our government has basically gone stupid over the last 20 years.
Megan, Australia's Voice, obviously founded by Fatima Payman, there are obviously critics that have accused it of being a quote-unquote Muslim party. I know that Senator Payman has obviously rejected that, and it is not explicitly a Muslim party by any means. I'm interested in your thoughts broadly, though. Do you think that religion and politics can mix as an elected representative?
Yeah, I do. So what we have in Australia is a very diverse landscape of faith-based groups, with Christianity, of course, remaining the largest religious affiliations. However, there's also a significant and growing presence of other religions like Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. The reality is that it can coexist. It comes down to human values. It comes back to kindness. It comes back to respect. Because what I see right now, right across this country, it does not matter what colour you are, what ethnic you are. There is something called discrimination, and discrimination is ripping through our country. As a result, what I do see in politics is a lot of hate and a lot of people where they're in positions of power, but the most marginalised are vulnerable, and just people that's living in Western Australia and indeed across the country, they're being well and truly left behind. And if we have a look at the premise, the Labor Party, they say they leave no one behind. Well, I beg to differ. The evidence is there. And when we start looking right through the issues, the biggest costs right now, or the biggest issues right now in terms of this election, we do see housing, we do see climate justice, we do see poverty, we do see cost of living, we do see mental health. So for a Labor government to say that they leave no one behind is not correct. So when Fatima did create this party, and all power to her, she's an amazing individual. We've had beautiful conversations, and what I see with Fatima is that she is a powerful, strong person, and she's powerful and strong because she believes in her own values and she's got integrity. And that's the reason why I joined up with Australia's Voice, because I liked what Fatima stood for, and she's a conviction politician. And I'll say that again, she's a conviction politician. She believes in what she believes in what she stands for, and therefore she's just an incredible lady. And that's the one thing that I loved about Fatima Payman and about joining this incredibly special party, because it is a fast-growing party. We've only been established for the last 4 months, but we have large membership already and so many volunteers and so forth. But when we come back, and I've seen it on Facebook, I've seen it on social media, this is a Muslim party. Well, in fact, that's not the case. I'm not Muslim, and some of our other candidates are not Muslim. But what I will tell you is that I am a human being, and I'm a human being like the other people that are in our party, like the rest of everyone else that's on this panel tonight.
Elana, I'm interested in your thoughts on a similar question. Yeah, do you think there can be a mix for religion and politics if you're an elected federal representative?
Well, full disclosure, I'm an atheist, so but the Australian Democrats have had a long history of, mostly Christian faith, but we are welcoming to all faiths and all religions in the party. Our focus is compassionate, evidence-informed governance, and I think faith shapes people's perspectives and the compassionate elements of all religions, I think, is incredibly important. So I do believe in separation of church and state, but at the same time, respecting and honouring people's relationship with whichever version of a God that they choose, I think is also incredibly important.
Okay, I am conscious of time here. One more question before we move on to candidate questions. And Jason, I'll start this one, or do you want to have a very quick comment about religion?
Well, I do, and I'll throw a spanner in the works here. I'm an active Freemason, so we don't discriminate against religion at all. So we've got Muslims, we've got Hindus, we've got Christians, we've got everybody. So the fundamental belief is believe in a supreme being. So, there's the fishing gods and the weather gods, so I'm right. But look, without being glib about it, it's all about values, and it's how we treat each other. So, I have a pretty simple motto, is to treat other people the way you want to be treated. And there's not enough kindness in this world. And I agree with you, Megan, there is a lot of hate in the political space at the moment, and it makes me sick, to be quite honest. And it's not needed. It's not needed either. It's just pushing people who are already down, kicking people when they're already down, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I do agree that we're all driven to what we do by our values, whether they're Christian values or whatever. I don't think that should come into it. It's just about how we want to treat each other people. Religion shouldn't really come into the fore. I know that it's involved and we never exclude it, but I don't want to see Sharia law or something, or any sort of religious law come in, because it's just completely subjective and tends to be abused by the people in the power with it when they hold the power of it. So look, I'm okay, and like I said, I judge people on their character, not on their colour of the skin, their creed, their religion, anything. It's how they present and what they do. Thank you.
Okay. So I want to move on to again one more question or one more kind of broad topic before we move on to individual candidates asking candidates. And I am maybe going to be a bit stricter with that 1 minute 30 max, just for time here, as I'm sure you can understand. But Jason, I will start with you on this, and obviously you're running for the Legalise Cannabis Party. Had a lot of success at state level, including, of course, in Western Australia. You recently had Dr. Brian Walker, MLC, re-elected. But look, the party has also faced questions about its credibility when it had 2 MPs elected the past state term. It lost one of them mid-term. You were disendorsing a candidate only a week ago. Is legalised cannabis, a serious option on the ballot, or is it just kind of a funny name that people can vote for?
No, well, look, to be honest with you, we're one of the few names on the ballot that makes sense to people. Now, people can look at the ballot and say Labor Party. Well, they're not about Labor. In the Liberal Party, well, they're certainly not about Liberal. So people go down the ballot paper and see legalised cannabis. Now, okay, it might be a niche market, but it makes sense to people. And I could argue that I'm the only person running in this election to actually make themselves redundant, because if I get legalised cannabis, we don't need to exist, do we, really? So, look, we're running in 12 seats in Western Australia, 41 federally. I think we're one, outside of One Nation and maybe the Christians and the major parties, we've got the most amount of representatives. We did have an issue with a candidate last week, which was unfortunate. We're no orphan there. We actually, unlike some of the other major parties who tend to double down on their road candidates, we identified that there was an issue. It didn't meet the party values, and we let him go, and it's simple as that. So we are a serious option, and we hope to pick up 2 to 3 Senate seats federally. And if we do, we hope, and this goes to my other fellow candidates here, what I hope is that we will have a block in the federal parliament after this election in the Senate that is a genuine moderate range. So we do not say that there is a group outside of the Greens that can pass legislation. That's what I'm saying. Because we've had 20 years with the Greens in the balance of power, and we've had no fundamental reform in this country. So we need to go a different way.
All right. Steve, as we mentioned earlier, the Australian Christians have just gotten their first MP at the state level, and congratulations to your party for that. And it's not a new party. It's been around for roughly a decade. But at the same time, you haven't had federal representation before. I mean, your state MP hasn't even technically been sworn in yet. Are the Christians ready to be in the federal parliament and dealing with legislation at the national level?
It's interesting, I was having a talk with someone about this before, and just by the way, the Australian Christians has been around for about 30 years or so. Previous to that, they were called the Christian Democrat Party, but they are the one and same party. And we have candidates in New South Wales as well as Western Australia, of course. So, and one of the things about our membership database and our followers is that they come from all walks of life. So we have engineers and pilots and teachers and mechanics and a lot of people contributing sensibly to the debate and to our policies. So the answer is absolutely, we are ready to do this. In the past, our policy has been rather than focusing on getting someone elected, although that was always important to us, but rather influencing the debate, sending our preferences to people who we thought echoed our policies. Now is the time for us to step up. And as you can see, Marika got to the upper house of Western Australian Parliament just recently, and we've had a massive increase in our in our support base in terms of the number of people voting for us just recently. So the answer to that is yes, we're absolutely ready. And when we think about the sort of policies we have, ours is a common sense approach. Now, there's no question about it. I'm a Christian, and I'm very happy to be a Christian. And I think if we think about Western government generally, it's always been based and developed and started by Christianity and to its advantage. But you also look and you recognise that our policies are common sense. I mean, if we take two obvious ones that have come up recently, many of you are getting an energy credit as a result of the various governments saying, okay, we'll give you, your cost of living is really high, we'll give you some money. Well, that's great. It's great to have money to help you pay your power bill, but it only happens once or twice or for a year. After that, you're worse off. What we really need to be thinking about is our energy infrastructure in the first place. If we don't get that right, if we're rushing headlong to close down things that mean that we then can't actually provide power to people, or the power that we provide is really expensive, then we're doing a crazy disservice to our country. If I don't want to, focus on that at Labor so much. I mean, if we think about the Liberals, for example, Mr. Dutton's a wonderful man. He's got this idea of a 25 cent a litre cheaper price for fuel, which sounds fantastic. I'm going to save 25 cents a litre, but it lasts 1 year, and then after that, you're worse off than you were before. We need to think about our energy infrastructure and our fuel and transport costs and all those things longer term. So when we think about, whether we are ready, our policies are set in place already. We know what we want to do. We know what needs to be done to fix Australia, fix families, support them, recognise children in the womb who are our responsibility, financial help for families, defence, we must be able to defend ourselves. Look after our farms, for heaven's sake. One of our policies, of course, is that live sheep export is okay. It's okay with us. We think it's all right. So, and we also recognise that Christians, speaking of Christians, are the most persecuted group of people in the world. We want to have a special visa to allow migrant Christian people into Australia, but we want the overall migration rate to drop because we simply can't handle it in terms of their infrastructure. So I think if you think about whether we are ready, of course, the other one I was going to say is the idea of faith-based education. A school or a university should be able to follow its faith, after all, that is in our constitution, when dispensing its policies and when hiring its teachers and everything else. And that shouldn't be forced on them by funding or by law. So all of these things are in place. We've got these policies ready to go, and we've got lots of good people ready to do it. So absolutely, we're ready to go into federal government.
All right, Megan, Australia's Voice, as we've discussed, is obviously a new party. It was formed only a few months ago. You do have the benefit, unlike the other parties here tonight, that you do have current federal representation. But look, as you kind of, admitted and conceded before, there's still policies being developed, there's still positions being put forward. Are you and is the party ready for more representatives, as you're obviously trying to become?
The party is well and truly ready. The courage by Fatima Payman with what she's done, that's no mean feat. She's a courageous individual that stood up for her values, stood up for her people, and basically said, no, I'm going to do what's right. In terms of myself, I'm not a kid that's just been brought into this. I'm well averse to the political life. I'm well averse to campaigns. I'm well averse to death and suffering and family and domestic violence. I'm well averse to the climate justice or injustice. I'm well averse to AUKUS and all the issues that we're facing there. So this is just the next logical step in terms of Australia's voice with myself as a candidate or the lead candidate from Western Australia. The amount of people that I've worked with across the country, across the state, both black, white and brown on a number of key issues, the next logical step is the Senate. What I'm seeing, and I agree with what Jason mentioned earlier parts, we have a government. We know it's going to be either Labor or Liberal. But what we need is a strong crossbench. There needs to be a contest of ideas. There needs to be education. It's going to be so powerful in the sense if we do have that. Because right now, if people want the same, they're going to vote the same. And that's what we don't want, particularly in the with the challenges that we're facing right across the country. And, you know, like I was saying earlier, brother, I see people across the park. I see people every single day that are struggling just to put food on their table. So when you hear it, you see it, you live it, you know that it's incumbent upon yourself to take it to the next level and push back on bad laws that cause human suffering, that cause human pain, that keeps people homeless, that ensures that mothers that want to go back to work, but they can't go back to work because there's nothing in terms of affordability in relation to daycare. That is problematic. So when you've seen as much as what I've done and what I've seen and what I've lived, it is incumbent to take that next step and put in place those changes and to bring that strength, that courage and be a conviction politician. So Australia's voice is absolutely ready to take the next step because this is what the country needs. The country needs a contest of ideas, not the same ideas, because you want the same, you're going to vote the same. We need a contest of ideas because right now I believe that the politics in this country, the bar is too low. We are here to raise that bar to unprecedented heights, to let people and enable people to live their best possible life. And that's not sitting back silent. It's about speaking with love and conviction and truth and educating, because once you educate, you can shift the public consciousness and therefore various laws can be changed. We know that when we're talking about Parliament or in Canberra, we know that's the highest legislative body in the country. We know about the laws and so forth. But what about a human rights bill? So in terms of the experience that we have, we are ready to take that next step, and we're ready to do that with strength, courage and conviction.
All right, Elana, just finally on this for you. The Australian Democrats, not a new party, had Senate representation, had it for a long time. Were the major, non-major party for a long time, as we all know. You haven't had an elected representative since I think it's about 2009. You know, the party, as you know, with respect, was in the Senate in WA last election, polling less than 0.5%. And you know, we have had comments asking, you know, why would we include the Democrats here? Are you in 2025 as a party still a credible option?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we're probably the only party where people lament our absence, you know, from politics. And I think the collapse in the quality and the political discourse over the last 20 years can be directly tied back to the fact that we are no longer in Parliament, holding people to account. And I think contributing to that discourse in a you know, sensible and constructive manner. You know, as you said, we held the balance of power for 30 years. A lot of the major reforms that transformed this country in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s were done in conjunction with Australia Democrats' assistance in the Senate and contributions from us in terms of amending legislation and helping governments refine it and negotiating with them to ensure that the legislation that they're introducing actually delivered the outcomes they said that it would. You know, we negotiate rather than grandstand. And I think the Australian Democrats probably hold the record for the number of private members' bills that were adopted by governments and implemented because we were willing to, you know, collaborate and you know, serve the nation's interest rather than our own political sort of interests, which probably indirectly, you know, contributed to our demise in a certain respect. But, you know, I think we're the only non-parliamentary minor party that still has former senators in our ranks who are contributing to our policy discussions and are mentoring the next generation that are coming through. So, you know, and I've been on pre-poll for the last sort of week and a bit, and the reaction to people when they see my Democrats t-shirt and realise that we're the same Democrats that they used to vote for, back in the day, and their excitement that we are still here as an option for them, I think indicates that there is an appetite in Australia for the sensible, evidence-informed and compassionate contribution to Australian politics that we delivered for 30 years, and we're well overdue to return and pick up where we left off.
All right, in our final segment, we want to give each candidate a chance to ask one other candidate one question. We've asked them to keep them specific questions so we know who's being directed to who, keep the questions relatively short for obvious reasons. And look, we don't know what's being asked. We don't even know if a candidate is going to ask something. They may choose not to ask anything. Steve, I'll start with you. You've got a question for another candidate? Ask away.
I do. I have a question for every candidate, but that's not how it works, is it? So I'm going to just ask one for Elana. I was just a little bit concerned about your policies on transport. So, for example, you talked specifically and I'm referring to the website. By the way, I met Don Chipp once upon a time. An amazing man, and the Australian Democrats actually, historically did keep the etc., as you know, and I think that was a great role for you. But yeah, so I was concerned, having said that, about the transport options you had, particularly in terms of electric vehicles and in terms of electric aircraft. Now, full disclosure, I happen to be a pilot, and I know that electric aircraft are a very long way away before they're going to be useful. I'm sort of wondering what's in your policy, but particularly electric transport, electric cars, because they are so polluting. They are so polluting in the manufacture of not only the cars themselves and the disposal of the products, but also the manufacture of the base materials that they require. You might have seen the thing on TV recently about the Indonesian refineries, which is nothing refined about them at all. So I guess what I'm saying is, I was very surprised to see that as part of your policy, and I'm wondering whether that's a bit ill-considered, because we are a long way from being able to say that electric vehicles are non-polluting, and they are actually, because it's fairly evident how much they are contributing to the global pollution problem. And not only that, the pollution problem that they are producing is very likely to continue for decades. It's not like something that we'll get over with quickly. So I'm just wondering what the Australian Democrats really feel about that, and why you've included that, knowing that background.
Well, I think, you say that like internal combustion engine vehicles are not also polluting in their manufacture, and then their use on the roads and things. Essentially what the world is doing is simply transitioning its fleet of vehicles from cars that pollute over their lifetime, from literal cradle to grave in the case of ICE cars, to cars that, yes, they may be, as you say, polluting in their manufacture, but once once they're actually on the road, are not as polluting as internal combustion engine vehicles, because they don't produce emissions. So I'm not actually sure what the issue that you're raising there is.
Well, what I'm saying is, if you take all of the pollution that's caused by an internal combustion engine car, or ICE car as you refer to them, and you compare that to the cost of the pollution produced and the long-term pollution produced by electric vehicles. And we're not talking now, by the way, about the subsidies the government is having so they don't contribute to road maintenance and building or any of that sort of stuff. We're just talking about the pollution over the life cycle of that car, including disposal of the elements and also the production of the raw materials. They are more polluting. So I'm very concerned. I'm wondering why you've actually considered that. It almost seems like a throwaway line in your website.
I'm not sure why. Okay. Do you have evidence that they are more polluting? Because that didn't come up when we were researching our policy.
Yeah, we do. It's not the format where I can do that, where I can give it to you, but I would certainly refer you to the bombshell evidence that was given to the most of our listeners would know about that. our viewers would know about the evidence given on TV only a week or two ago about the Indonesian refinery, which isn't, by the way, the only one around the world, and the cost in terms of pollution and the danger associated with that, so that we would have the raw materials for making electric cars. Did you see that program by any chance?
I did not know. I don't watch free-to-air television. But I mean, which particular refinery are you talking about, and what is it they are refining there?
So that one's nickel, I think, but of course there are lots of elements you require for batteries and electric vehicles generally. Perhaps if you're not familiar with that, I might leave that question.
Yeah, we just might have to leave that because I'm
we might have to leave
around.
But
look, we appreciate the question being raised, and people can check out other networks for themselves. I will keep moving forward. Elana, if you've got a question for another candidate.
Sure, Jason. We spoke about this at the ballot draw for the Senate. So you've been very, very clear and very, very open and transparent about the fact that legalised cannabis is essentially a one-issue party, and that you are essentially working to make yourself redundant if once you succeed in having cannabis legalised. So if you were elected to the Senate, how would you, for non, cannabis-related policies and legislation, how would the voters sort of assess, how would you vote upon or come to, positions on non-cannabis related legislation and things, sort of what, I guess what I'm asking is like, how would the party's values inform your decision-making and the particular issues that you would champion?
Well, that's exactly it. It's our party values would come down, which is tolerance, fairness, freedom in particular. So, we'll apply a common sense approach to legislation. That's what I do. And just as an aside, Don Chip's son is actually a member of our party. So, it's not all gone the Dems' way the last few years. And as you know, Elana, I was a member of the Dems. I was deputy campaign manager for the only WA senator to get re-elected, which was Andrew Murray. So I'm very familiar with that whole process and the role that the Democrats played. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be at then, and unfortunately, I don't think, as much as I would love to see the Democrats regain the position they had, I think that boat has well and truly sailed. So, look, we will apply, like I said, common sense and our party values, which anybody can go and find on our website. There's about 7 of them. I think most people will find them fairly reasonable. Like I said, it's about treating other people like you want to be treated. And as so many medicinal cannabis users are being discriminated against at the moment, that would be one of the first things we would look to address. So that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should add that, we're not a cult of personalities. So, Greg Chip is welcome to join any political party he wishes. I mean, his father was a great man and we honour his legacy.
He was a great man.
All right. Megan, if you've got a question for another candidate.
I may direct this question to Steve. So just in relation to what's happening in Gaza, what's the position of the Australian Christian Party in relation to calling it a genocide or not a genocide?
So I missed the first part of your question. In relation to what did you say, Megan?
In relation to the Palestine, Gaza. I was just trying to work out what the position.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you're referring to the fact that your leader was against the idea, the Labor Party's vote on Palestine back in the day, some months ago, or I'm not exactly sure when it is. I have to tell you that and I'm sure you already know this, and I'm sure your boss knows it as well, that the Middle Eastern area is fraught with difficulties. It has got many different groups associated with it, many different groups fighting for power and for recognition and for land and various other things. It is a very, very difficult situation, which I personally think is decades away from being solved, even though Donald Trump is saying, well, we'll have a little bit in the area where that'll be just American and that'll be all fine. We'll all have our recreation areas there in our hotels. Even allowing for that sort of stuff and the firepower that they might bring to bear in defending that land, it is something that is going to take a very, very long time to fix. but it is also an area where we must respect everybody. So we can't wholesale pull people out, or we can't say you don't belong here or you don't have these rights or those rights. So we don't have a policy on that per se, but I know that the Middle East is, as I said, a hotbed of difficulty, and it will be for some time. Now, having said that, of course, we have a natural affinity for Israel because, you know, the Judeo-Christian religion was based on obviously Judaism originally, and Christ came along as a reformer. But there's no question about it. It is an area that is very difficult, and we must consider all sides. And I really don't think in this federal Senate term of 6 years we're going to come to a solution. I might also point out, just by the way, that over the decades and decades since, well, it's even before Israel was formed in 1948, even before that, we've always had problems in that area. And you might remember President Jimmy Carter was given a peace prize, a Nobel Peace Prize, for trying to fix everything. But of course he couldn't, and he didn't. And so the position I have, all I can tell you is that it is very difficult. We're happy to work with everyone. We have to respect the rights of all people. But it is not something that we're going to be solving in this term of 6-year term of Senate term.
All right, and just finally, Jason, if you've got a question for another candidate.
Dare I say, Steve's perfectly ready for Parliament because you spoke for 5 minutes and didn't answer the question. The answer to that question is yes, there is a genocide at the moment. So I'll just put that. And my question is for Megan.
Sorry, I thought I answered it well. I'll come back to you.
So you and I think, share a lot of similarities in our concern for particularly with mental health and family and domestic violence. Now, the question I've got for you is that if you happen to be successful at this election, will you join in my call to have that 400-bed white elephant up at Bullsbrook that was built there to, you know, shore up the Pierce marginal seat for the coalition, instead of building it at Jandakot where it would have actually been useful? Would you agree to have that open and use for domestic violence or people fleeing domestic violence who perhaps have small children who aren't working, who don't need to commute, to be able to use that facility that's sitting there at the moment, basically, you know, $500 million they spent on that, to open that up so that in the city, the emergency accommodation for people with families is available, because at the moment there is an absolute crisis with accommodation. My daughter works in the space. They're constantly putting people in hotels and motels because they cannot find family arrangements. Look, it's not a fix, but it's at least something that can take the pressure off. Do you agree that that is something that we should consider?
No.
Yes, in a very, very short response, absolutely. I support that 100%.
Oh God, a non-politician answer. Well done.
that makes things nice and easy there. Yeah, that makes a really nice conclusion there. Look, we will give chances for a closing statement now for all candidates, and we'll go backwards in alphabetical order. So, Elana Mitchell, your closing statement.
Thank you. So I think, you know, the world and indeed Australia is going through a period of great disruption, and our political environment is shifting dramatically. And I don't think that this election is going to be the first election where the majority of the, or not the majority, but certainly a large portion of the population votes for a candidate or a party that is not one of the two majors. And so, the Australian Democrats stand ready to serve. As I said before, we've been involved in significant reform and significant contribution to Australian public life over the 48 years of our history. And, I think Australia as a society and as a country needs to, we need a great deal of significant reform to return us to being a compassionate, fair, egalitarian society where we look after each other, we look after the most vulnerable among us, and there are some significant challenges that we need to face across health, education, mental health, as Megan and Jason both raised, our environment, and also areas that aren't aren't visible in this election at the moment, such as disability and the incredible challenges that the LGBTQIA+ community are facing. And, our party has more than 30 policies dealing with every aspect, of all the challenges that the country is facing. And we, as I said, we want to contribute to public life and contribute to compassionate, evidence-informed, and reasonable outcomes that will assist all Australians. So, we do implore people to look at our policies and look at our history, and hopefully give us your vote come Saturday. So, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jason. Meotti, your closing statement.
Thank you. Einstein had a definition of insanity. It was to do the same thing over and over and expect a different outcome. I feel that that's where we are at as an electorate at the moment, that we keep voting for the same parties and we keep getting the same outcomes. We have not had fundamental reform in this country for over 25 years, and it is showing. It is coming through in the cost of living crisis, through a housing crisis, through an environmental crisis. So what we need to do is to look at doing things a little bit differently. Now, you can send a clear message to the major parties, if you want in particular, but also to the minors, that legalising cannabis is something that just needs to be done. I talk to politicians off the camera, they all agree, Liberal, Labor, they all realise it's coming. And what we need to do at the same time as we legalise cannabis is to tighten up the availability of both alcohol and tobacco, because they are too widely available at the moment, and that is what is half of our problem. 98% of all drug deaths in this country are alcohol and tobacco related. Now, when it comes to me, I get things done. I've already changed laws in this state and I wasn't even in Parliament. So what do you think I can do if I get there? I involve myself in the community. I've helped get Triple J up to Broome in the 1990s, running an organisation called Regional Broome Regionalisation, the Australian Youth Network. I've organised mural projects in Geraldton, and I've coached my son's footy team and been on PNCs where we've spent money that have been accumulated for years, but they hadn't bitten the bullet to actually get it done. I get things done. So if you put me in Canberra, I will work tirelessly for the people of Western Australia, just Western Australia, not Eastern State Masters, just the people of Western Australia and every person in Western Australia. Now, one of the things, as you can probably guess, I'm passionate about is hemp. Now, with hemp, we can solve so many crises in this state. And I'll just bring one other up, that the mining industries that is currently grasping the reality of net zero and how to get there. So some of them are converting to electric vehicles, which are very expensive and don't last very long. They could be using and continue to use diesel-motored vehicles if they were sourcing their fuel as a biofuel from hemp. That's a reality. And they could be growing their own fuel on their tenements. You know, a lot of mines need to get rid of water. They can use it to water hemp. So what I'm passionate about is ending this discrimination against hemp. Bring that online, help our farmers, help our regional communities, bring manufacturing and processing back into the regions of Western Australia. Hemp can do it. It will grow from the Ord River right down to Esperance. On Saturday, when you go to vote legalise cannabis 1 in the Senate, and I will take that fight up to Canberra. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan Krakouer. Megan Krakouer, your closing statement.
No worries. It's been an absolute pleasure and honour being on this show with yourself, Steve, Jason, Elana. It's been incredible. So obviously with Australia's Voice, what we're wanting to achieve is something where we can actually educate, arbitrate, negotiate and bring about that much needed change to this national landscape, but more so in Western Australia. The policies that we have at this point, including the national poverty measures, fixing the HECS debt, and protecting our resources and the likes. NDIS, we know that NDIS, we have people living out in the community with disabilities. And the NDIS right now is an absolute flop. It's a fail because we have people living in communities and they're not getting the support because it's just too difficult to navigate. What we want is a Human Rights Act or a Human Rights Bill. There is no Human Rights Bill right now in this country in terms of federally. We have them in other jurisdictions, other countries and so forth, but it does not happen here in this country. It's in terms of housing, the family and domestic violence, the real climate action, that has to change. So with someone like me, with someone already there, Fatima, we're vibrant, we're strong, we speak with conviction, we speak with truth, and we're not scared to take on the status quo. And that doesn't mean to say that we're going to be disruptors. That doesn't mean to say that I'm going to be a disruptor. What that means is that I'm going to be a truth teller, and a truth teller for the people, a truth teller for the issues. And I won't just be speaking about certain issues when I don't know about it. I'll be speaking with the various groups and therefore bringing to Canberra their issues of concern to bring about that incredible change. That's what's needed. We don't need the same people time in, time out, because if you're going to vote, you're going to vote the same. That's the truth of it. We need difference. We need a contest of ideas. We need people that are sensible, reasonably headed, and people that's not as scared to change and challenge the status quo. So with AV, Australia's Voice, we are new, we are innovative, we are only 4 months young. But within that 4 months, the number of volunteers, the number of policies, the number of collaborations, the number of people that have actually came into this party that are speaking highly, and this is even at the poll booth, they say it's refreshing. They say this is great because it comes with a fresh set of eyes, a human lens. And this is what's very much needed is in this country. We need a different focus. We need to raise that bar right now that exists in this politics, to raise it to unprecedented levels, to bring about that change that is much needed. So Saturday, vote 1, Megan Krakouer, Australia's Voice, vote for real change. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. And just finally, Steve Klomp, you've been waiting there very patiently, so we'll let you close it out with your closing statement.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Leo. I think it's fair to say most people would recognise that we are heading for a hung parliament. It's very likely that the minor parties, therefore, will hold the balance of power, which is a unique position to be in. I don't know how long that will last before perhaps another election is called. I'm expecting it will last for the full term of the government. But it is very likely that Labor and Liberal will be very close to each other, and they'll rely on the support of the minor parties to actually get legislation passed. So that's why it's so important that you think about the minor parties, regardless of where you put your preferences. Think about the minor parties and the influence they can have over what happens in Australia in this term of government. So for that reason, I want you to very carefully consider Australian Christians Party. We obviously are very sensible in the way we are doing things. We are very compassionate towards people, but we're also impatient about things that shouldn't be happening in our society. Silly decisions about how we spend their money and the social policies we have that make no sense and don't actually help anyone. There was a debate the other day on TV, as you might know, between Dutton and Albanese, and Dutton was asked the question, how much is the price of eggs? Now, it was a bit of a silly question. They were trying to work out whether he was, in fact, in touch with the cost of living. The answer, by the way, is somewhere between $8 and $9, and Dutton said $4.20. So he was a fair way out. But what we have to understand is we need politicians who are in touch with what's going on, who are aware of how much it's costing people to live. We also have to recognise that the most important element or unit in our society is our families. Yet we don't actually help them. We'll give 26 to 90% of the cost of childcare to an institution so you can put your child there, but we won't say to a mum, hey, if you want to stay home and look after your child, we'll pay you that money. And there's no reason why we can't do that. The most important resource we have is our children coming along, and we are not looking after families and those children. So when we think about Australian Christians, think about the sensible policies we have. We're not here to make a quick fix to get votes, such as paying for your energy for a short time or giving you a reduction on fuel. We're saying let's think about infrastructure and things that are actually going to benefit Australia in the long term. We also know that you need to have a better defence force than we have. I love the idea that our defence force is defending and protecting, not attacking. And that's the way we always should be. We shouldn't be belligerent or aggressive, but we need to be able to defend ourselves, and we're not at the moment, and we need to be able to fix that. We also need, as I said, to protect our industries and build new ones. Our farming industry is under siege. Our mining industry has all sorts of red tape they have to deal with. And we also have to think about our other groups within Australia. I mean, for example, our Aboriginal people make up around about 5% of our population. We spend an enormous amount of money on them, but we don't know what we're doing, and it all goes wrong all the time. And we have to think about making sure that Aboriginal people are involved in the decision-making process, and that we are actually spending that money logically and to give them the help they need to get going. We need to think about housing in a much better way, the way we allocate public housing, but the cost of housing for people and why it is that they can't actually get into a house when everybody wants it. Now, I know every generation had a problem. When I was buying my house, my interest rate was pegged at 13%. Some people had to pay 17%. So it was a horrific amount. So when we think about today, is it better or worse? Well, it certainly isn't good. So we need to think about how we can alleviate that to people, especially young families who are trying to get into the market. We also want to protect all of our vulnerable people, people with physical and mental disabilities, our aged people, our children in the womb. We need to think about all those sorts of people and how we can best help them. And of course, we also have to remember that we have a constitutional right to freedom of religion, yet our schools are being forced into not actually following their own faith. Now, interestingly enough, one of the things that people don't understand is that our constitution does not guarantee freedom of speech. It only guarantees freedom of religion, which is why some of the silly laws are being passed. So one of the other things that I'm very keen to champion when I get to the Senate, if you'll have me there, and please, I ask you to at least consider me, is the idea of changing our constitution so we have freedom of speech as well. So think about all those things when it comes to the ballot box. I think that we are the party that will provide the relevant stopgap between the major parties who are going to be hung anyway. We'll be in a position to actually make real change because of the likelihood of a very close parliament. And our policies are there for all to see. You know what you're going to get. You know how we are basing our ideas on common sense approach to families, defence, farming, industry. Oh, and by the way, speaking of the NDIS, I have to agree with you, Megan. It is an absolute shambles. And one of the problems with the NDIS is how much is being stolen by different groups, which the government still isn't addressing. So that'll be one of my other priorities as well. Vote 1, Australian Christians in the Senate in New South Wales and Western Australia. Thank you.
Okay, Steve Klomp, thank you very much. And that is where we will wrap up our Western Australian Senate debate. Thank you very much to all candidates, Steve Klomp, Megan Krakouer, Jason Meotti and Elana Mitchell for joining us tonight. It's been a long night, but we really appreciate all of them for being here. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, our final Senate debate, Tasmania. 3 candidates. 3, yep, just 3. We've managed to find them. We'll chuck them on tomorrow night as well. But we're really looking forward to that. Thank you to everyone for being here tonight. A reminder, of course, you can leave all your thoughts in the comment section and become a supporter for just $4 a month. Patreon.com/SIXNewsAU. I'm Leonardo Puglisi in 6 News Melbourne headquarters. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.
This has been a special presentation from 6 News Australia.